let me say hi, let me introduce myself. I'm delighted to be doing this with the Greater Hartford Arts Council. I'm talking about one of my favorite things, which is branding, and particularly branding for the arts, branding for arts organizations, branding for individual creatives and artists. I'm on the board of the New Haven Arts Council, as some of you may know, and it's one of my great pleasures to be working with them and throughout the New Haven and Connecticut region, as well as regionally, to really bring some of the tenets and theories and practices from the business world, from the commercial sectors to the arts. And we will talk a lot about kind of why that's important. But let me just share my screen and we will jump in, and I will say two things. First, one is that I'm going to go through a lot of material quickly, but please do put your questions in the chat, and we'll go through all of those at the end. And the other thing that I wanted to say is this is primarily focused this morning on arts organizations, even if that's one person. But also there are a number of practicing artists, individual artists and creatives who are joining us this morning. And for those of you who are, please don't think I'm ignoring you. Everything that I say this morning, this afternoon actually, is absolutely applicable, whether you're talking about your individual practice or whether you're talking about arts administration and nonprofits. So, and if you have specific questions about your own practice branding, I am available afterward as well as in the future. So let me see if I can effectively share my screen, and we will, hang on a second, and we will do this. Okay, so hang on one sec. Okay. So here we are, and this is what we're talking about this morning. So let me just tell you quickly about me, so I have some street cred here. I'm a brander. I've been a brander forever, whether it's been in television, which is where I started my career as a producer, to higher ed that I moved into after that, where I spent many years figuring out how universities, everybody from Harvard to the University of New Haven, could brand themselves. And trust me, branding was not a concept that anybody was terribly enthusiastic about, because in some ways, like the arts, it was seen as tainting the academic integrity of what they did and what they do, but they needed to reach markets in the same way that arts organizations and nonprofits do. I ran my own branding agency in Boston for a number of years during the high-tech boom, and was had a great deal of fun branding small startups and technology companies. So I'm now bringing all of that to my own consulting practice, where I work with a number of arts organizations as well as nonprofits, and also commercial business, as well as individuals who are looking to tell their stories in ways that are resonant and unique. And that's really what we're going to talk about this morning. And let me just say, before we sort of jump into this, that I'm not going to talk about data. I'm not going to talk about metrics. I'm not going to talk about social media. That's really after what we're talking about today. The question today is, how do you get to the core of that brand story? And how do you develop that story? And once you have that story, that's when you can begin to think about how to share it. So we'll do a subsequent webinar on how to take that story and put it into the mainstream. But for today, I want to really get down to the basics of what a brand story is. And I'll also say that, you know, I hesitate often to use the word brand, because I think the word brand has become so overused and so ubiquitous that it's really stopped having the kind of meaning that I give it anyway. People see it as spin, or they talk about branding in other terms. The way I see brand is that it's an organic story that grows out of the core of a mission or of a purpose, and that it has to be authentic and it has to grow from within, not something that comes from the outside that you put on like a costume. So that's where I start and end when I'm defining brand. And obviously, what's the purpose of it? Well, the purpose is particularly with nonprofits, but certainly with multinational corporations as well. The object is to drive deep and lasting relationships with the audiences and the participants and the funders and the sponsors and anybody else that you care about. And it's particularly important for nonprofits, and I would say that, and arts organizations in particular, because the pandemic, if it's shown us anything, is that we have to speak in a fluent, coherent, and memorable way in it, so that the missions and the values and cultures of arts organizations and even individual artists are loud and clear and make an impact that supports the impact of the organization overall. So I think there's a real clarion call here. There's a call to action, and now is the time to meet that challenge, which is one of the reasons that the Greater Hartford Arts Council and I felt that this was an important moment to be talking about this stuff. So I get this a lot. We're artists, we're good, why should we care? And I have a lot of thoughts on that, but I want to say that there are a lot of misunderstandings about branding. And my answer is that artists and arts organizations need branding as much as anybody, because so much of art is misunderstood or is understood in a way that is not in alignment with an individual practice or with an organization. And so it's really important to be able to shape the perception of what you do and how you do it. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. People think that if they have a logo, it's once and done. Okay, you've got the logo, I'm branded. And I would say that logos are the last thing that you do. A logo is a visual representation of that authentic brand that we're talking about. It represents what an organization does, but more importantly, it also is a visual system or a visual insignia that answers the question, why should I care? And that's why logos are so tough, because it's not like a decoration that you hang on a tree. It is the window into the answer of why should I care and what are we all about? And we'll talk more about that in a minute. And most importantly, branding, it's a loud, crazy world out there. And I hesitate to use the word competition in the nonprofit sector, but I think we have to call it what it is. There are a lot of people, a lot of organizations out there. And what branding, the ultimate, bottom line, end of the day purpose of branding is to set yourself or your organization apart. And the madding crowd is loud. And how do you rise above that din? And my belief is that it all comes down to brand. And branding isn't simply a set of words or a set of images. Branding is based on a promise. It's the promise of value. And we're going to break this down, but I think it's important to understand that you have to be explicit about what it is that your prospective or current members, donors, funders, participants, attendants at a performance get if they align themselves with you. It's a transactional relationship, and it is not enough. I love to say this because it bears repeating again and again. It's not enough to simply be good. Everybody's good. We're all good at what we do. But there's also, that goes along with that, that's sort of a navel-gazing sort of thing. There's this assumption that if we're good, they will come. In other words, I don't have to do anything. My work stands for itself. Our programs stand for themselves. People will find us. It is simply not self-evident. At least you can't assume that it's self-evident. You have to shout it from the rooftops, and I mean that in a very sort of global sense. that if you don't tell your story and if you don't talk about your value, that people aren't going to get it. And hope is not a strategy. You can't sit there and hope that people are going to find you, because they're not. And so branding is a very strategic process, and it requires thought and deliberation. So why does it all come down to a story? It comes down to a story because people remember stories. You can do PowerPoints till the cows come home. You can print things. You can put all of the sort of great things about yourself in digital form and in playbills and whatever it happens to be. But really, what people are going to remember is the story that you tell them, and that's the object here: is to create a memorable story. Whoops! Wait a minute. And this is sort of where the rubber meets the road. Perception is always reality. It doesn't really matter what's true if people don't perceive it. And I think the mistake that a lot of organizations of any kind, I dealt with this a lot in higher education, which is that there was a murky idea of sort of what the value proposition, what is it that this education really will buy? What am I buying with this education? And no two people that you asked about one college or a university would say the same thing. And what happens then is that you're letting other people define you. And that doesn't have to be the case. It's sort of the good news, bad news. People will define you if you don't do it. And stuff gets murky. But it doesn't have to be that way, because if you begin to shape your identity, and if you begin to really get your arms around the words and the story that you're using, and you're confident about it, people begin to perceive you the way you want to be perceived. And obviously that comes across on your website. I mean, that's the starting point for everybody, but it also is the way you talk about your practice or your organizations in a meeting, at a party, to friends. And suddenly those words, when I brand organizations, we pay a lot of attention to words, because those words you use over and over again, and then your identity becomes your own. And just one thing, it's not bragging. I find a lot of people, particularly in the arts and also women in particular, are very hesitant to sing their own praises or their own organization's praises, because it feels inauthentic and it somehow feels uncomfortable. But I would just maintain that it is anything but that. So, good brand stories. It's not about looking in. It's not about looking in on yourself. It's not about sitting around a conference table or at your computer and saying, oh, these are all the things that I think are important. It's really important to try to get up here, to try to get to the 100,000-foot view and try to see, and this is hard. I mean, I spend a lot of time with people saying, no, get off the ground, get up here and take a look at how you think other people see you. Now, there are lots of ways to do that. One of the ways a lot of people do it is they ask their constituents, what do you think? How do you see us? But it's also possible, if you're a solo person, either as a solo artist or as a 1 or 2 person arts organization with no staff or ability to survey, to really try to take a look at how you think you're perceived. And then to ask the question, what are people seeing? Is it what we want them to see? And I bet the answer 50% of the time, at least, is no. So then the job is to figure out what you want them to see. It's also a matter of what I call the value proposition, which is a fancy term for what you see is what you get. And that means that as I said earlier, any interaction with your key audiences are transactional. It gets back to, it's not enough to be good. What are you actually offering them? What is it that you, and we're going to look at some examples of this in a minute. What is it that you're promising them that will accrue to them if they align themselves with you, if they come to your performance, if they come to your exhibit, if you have a proposal or a grant proposal in front of them? What is it that you're promising them, no matter what, that they will get if they engage with you? And that's really, really important. It's also a very hard question to answer, but once you get it, it informs all of your thinking about the brand. So let me just make sure. Okay, so here, forgive me for using Folgers, which none of us, I think, drink anymore, as an example, but it's a great example of the kind of what's in it for me, what do I get? Branding. This is a classic example of branding. So here's Folgers coffee. Can anybody, well, raise your hand if you know what their tagline is, because their tagline is their value proposition. I see a couple of hands, and since you're all muted, I will tell you that it is the best. Whoops, it's cut off. The best part of waking up. Okay, it's silly, right? And it's certainly not the best part of my waking up, but it is memorable, and it talks about their value proposition. They've used this for decades. They've associated Folgers with happiness in the morning, with a great cup of coffee, and they're promising that. Now, a lot of people will think that's not what you get with Folgers, but that's what they are saying. That's how they're positioning their coffee. Here's, and Jen Eifrig of JDPP is with us this morning. JDPP, the Justice Dance Performance Project, has done this brilliantly, which is, this is their value proposition and their benefit promise. This has been their tagline for a long time. Moving for change since 1989. That really says it all. It's about the movement arts, and it's also about their brand, if you pardon the expression, Jen, of movement arts, which is, it's about social justice and change. And so it's an immediate thing that you remember about Judy Dworin and the wonderful Justice Dance Performance Project. And I'm going to show you their brand narrative in a minute. You know, when I do exercises with folks about how to start this ball rolling with getting to the heart of your brand, I do an exercise that makes everybody's blood run cold, but in the end is something that's incredibly valuable. I would offer this morning that brand comes down to one word. That if you can get that one word, you are going to have the world of brand open up to you. So let's talk about what that means. And I apologize for so many commercial examples, but these are so memorable that I wanted to put them in front of you this morning. Strong brands equal one word. Not everybody's going to be able to come up with one word. Trust me, we lock ourselves in rooms and have, you know, whiteboards full, and it's still really hard to come up with that one word, but it's an important concept for you to think about, even if you can't do it. So I would normally open this up and say, what one word do you associate with FedEx? And I will answer that for you, as I'm sure you already know it. FedEx has one word that they've been associated with from the early days when, you know, delivering packages quickly was a new thing, and everybody was like, wow, you can really do that. And FedEx's tagline and value proposition and benefit promise from the get-go has been, when it absolutely positively has to be there, overnight. So their one word is overnight. And when I ask this question, and I've asked this question of audiences for years, everybody says overnight. Or they start to say, well, quickly. And I'm like, how quickly? Overnight. So FedEx tells you exactly what it does, and it tells you exactly what you get. It delivers packages overnight. Let's look at another one, Volvo. So Volvo, if I ask this question, it's a little harder, but the one word that Volvo has spent millions of dollars and decades owning is safety. when you ask people, what do you associate with Volvo? You talk about suburban moms and you talk about kids and you talk about this. Everybody eventually comes down to safety. When you buy a Volvo, you are buying, in their minds, safety. Now, is it really any safer than any other car in its class? I know nothing about cars, but people tell me that it's not. That many other cars in that class are also just as safe as a Volvo. But Volvo has invested in that word and has invested in people immediately thinking, my kids are going to be safe in that car. And the other thing about the Volvo example is they're not trying to sell to everybody. Their core audience, the audience that they are targeting, that they are talking to, is suburban moms. And that's who they advertise to, and that's who they invest all of their branding energy in. It doesn't mean other people don't buy them, but they're owning that lane, if you'll pardon that bad metaphor around cars. They're owning that, and they've spent a lot of money owning the word safety. Here's some other examples. So when brands become really strong, they become universal. They become verbs. You don't say, I'm going to go, you might say, I'm going to go copy something, but more often you're going to say, I've got to Xerox this. Now, Xerox is a brand name, but Xerox has also become a way you do something. And probably the best example, at least the most current, is Google. We say, have you Googled it? I've got to Google it. And clearly, there's been kabillions of dollars invested in doing that. So what I ask people, and if we were doing this in a workshop, I would ask you, what one word are you? Now that could be you, the organization, or it could be you, the individual artist. And it's not, the word I'm thinking of is not talented or brilliant or generous. I'm asking, what noun are you? If you were a thing, what would you be? And the reason this is important is that if you come up with that thing, it embodies the what and the why. So let's say you told me you were a lighthouse. And bear with me on this, I promise you'll see the connection here. If you told me you were a lighthouse, I'd then say, oh, that's interesting, why? And you'd think for a minute and you'd say to me, because I guide ships into the harbor. So you could be any kind of an organization if that really was the image that you wanted to associate with your practice or your target audience. You, in a way, solving their problem. Oh, you give guidance. Oh, you're going to make things clearer. If, let's say, you're a bungee jumper, that would be about taking risks. In other words, we help you jump off the cliff. We are a net that will catch you when you fall. I mean, you can sort of see field glasses. We help you see more clearly. I'm a chef because I put all of these wonderful ingredients together and come out with something new. So I'm not saying that you're going to be a FedEx or you're going to be a Volvo and come up with that one word. But if you're really talking about getting to your value proposition and getting to the promise that you're making to your audiences, this exercise is really interesting to do. Even if you are a one-person arts organization, even if you are, 10 people, this is a really interesting thing to sort of do a stream of consciousness around, because you will be surprised, I think, at what you come up with. And it also then, in many cases, and I'm going to show you an example of this, then informs your whole visual system. So, little engine that could, making your one word work hard, or let's just say your one concept. Now, this is, I did a workshop a long time ago, well, a couple years ago, with a group of women CPAs, and they had their own firms, and they came because they had the question, CPA firms, and particularly medium to small sized accounting firms, are usually run by women, and we all look the same and we all do the same thing, and how can we possibly set ourselves apart so people can take notice of us? And so I gave them the one word exercise to do in this workshop. And then I said, okay, so now tell me what your one word is and tell me why. And so this one woman raised her hand and she said, I have no idea why I thought this, but I think we'd be an aspirin. And I went, oh, why? And she said, like off the top of her head, because we take the pain away. I was like, wow. Because it got to what we do and what's the problem that we solve. And this is what, what does aspirin have to do with accounting? But out of that concept, using the aspirin, and she actually, over the last few years, has developed the aspirin into the aspirin bottle into a logo. So this is their statement on their website, and I won't bore you with all of it. But we know how difficult financial management for small business owners can be. Okay, there's the target audience right there, and that's also the pain point. People didn't start their small businesses in order to do sophisticated financial management, right? We've been able to take the headache out of business and tax planning. Okay, what's in it for me? That's answering the what's in it for me question. And again, that keeps you awake at night. Again, answering the pain point, solving the problem. So that's why we call our services certified financial pain management. Okay, so that comes from the aspirin, and that is memorable. It's absolutely, she was, I don't know, where that came from. They've used this now for a few years, and it's just been a very successful campaign for them. And I think it's a great example. Not all of us are going to be that lucky to come up with something that just falls like this, but you can look at this and use this as a template to get your branding muscles pumping. So here we go back to JDPP. This is their brand statement that is infused in everything that they do. Not all of it is everywhere. They take pieces of it and they move it around, but harnesses creative expression as a catalyst for positive change. That's the what. What do they do? It's right there. How do they do it? Dance, theater, performance, and multi-arts engagement. Okay, that's the how. To examine social issues, now we're beginning to get to the why, and why should I care? What's it going to do for me? Inspire individual growth and collective action, tapping resources as people grow and heal. It's perfect. And it's an example that I think is, again, a template for you as you think about what's the, what, why, how, and what is your value proposition, and what is it that you're promising audiences they are going to get by coming to your performance, buying your piece of art, supporting your organization. And again, you see their tagline, which is really a roll-up of all of this. If you knew nothing else about JDPP and you saw their tagline, you'd get a pretty good idea of whether you wanted to go to a performance or engage with them in some way. So this goes to the very important point of knowing your audience. And yep, you're right. It's not everyone. You are not talking to everyone. You've got to own your lane. And this means that a lot of nonprofits in particular, because fundraising is so important, cast too wide a net. You cannot be all things to all people, no matter how desperate your fundraising is. Greater benefit accrues from owning your lane, staking your claim, mapping out your territory than it does from spreading yourself, particularly for small staffs, too broadly, too wide. You have to decide who's that core audience that you're talking to, current and prospective participants. Who is that? And you'll have data that will tell you, or you can do a deep dive into other similar organizations and figure out who their audiences are and market like crazy to them. And what is it that they need? What are they going to be looking to you for? If you're a performing artist, if you are a visual artist, why is it that people come to your shows? It's narrow, it's not broad. And I use the example to make it more concrete of, you walk into an Italian restaurant or even Chinese restaurant or any kind of restaurant really, and you get one of those 5-page, plastic covered menus, and you're flipping the pages and you have no idea what's good. What is really good at this restaurant? And that's a good way to think about distilling your value, your product, your vision, your mission into this core concept that speaks directly to the people that are most important to you. You've got to identify the people that are most important to you. So that's what I mean about owning your lane. And it's really hard. I mean, it's been hard for me in my work, particularly when I'm been owning my own firms. You don't want to leave money on the table. You're like, well, what about them? Well, what about them? Well, gosh, maybe they could. But it dilutes your energy, particularly if you're a small firm or a one-person shop or an individual artist. You're going to spend way too much on the people that are never going to care about you and not enough attention on the people that are dying to pay attention to you. So take a deep breath and take some of that stuff off the table. Okay, taglines. Guess what? They're not for everybody. And everybody wants a tagline. The first thing they want is a logo, and the next thing they want is a tagline. Taglines are superfluous if they don't work. They have to address, and they're really hard. I guess you've heard me say it's really hard several times already. Branding isn't easy, but it has to be deliberate. And I think the same thing about taglines. Taglines are different than the ubiquitous elevator speeches, things that you say to people quickly. We could spend a whole other hour talking about, your elevator speech. Let me just say quickly that if you get your brand down and you know what that core thing is that you want people to remember, that you don't need a tagline, and your elevator speech will take care of itself, because you are going to know what you want to say and how you're shaping what people are thinking about you. I just threw a number of these up here. These aren't necessarily, award-winning taglines, but they get to the heart of what it is that you do and who it's for, and a little bit about mission and purpose. So it's, I think for arts, for artists and nonprofits, taglines are tricky, because it's not like you're selling coffee. It's not like you're selling a car. It's not like you're promising great depth and breadth in your internet searches. They're worth thinking about. When I've worked with the New Haven Arts Council to get to their brand, and they've been asking the question for a long time, how do we, and I know that the Greater Hartford Arts Council is too, that you try to come up with that one word. With the Arts Council and with the New Haven Arts Council, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out what separates them within their target audience. And it's been an ongoing discussion that we've had. And I think if you look at their website, you'll see that they're doing a lot of good work in that direction. This is just a little kind of checklist for you as we get to the end here, about what a brand toolkit would look like. It starts with your mission. It starts with why your heart is in what you do. It talks to purpose and commitment, and it's the statement that says, this is our stake in the ground. These are the things we care about, and this is why. Out of that, you derive your value, your promise. If you're interested in what we do, and if you think that what we do is important, here's what we promise you the value is of joining with us, with throwing your hat in our ring. Brand attributes are what you then distill. What are the things that your brand stands for? And so this is a little more involved and something that takes its own discussion that we don't have time for here. But you break down that mission and your brand, and you come out with 4 or 5 things that speak to that value, that are sort of the proof points of that value. And then you have the all-important messaging. Once you figure out the brand attributes, then you figure out how you're going to say it. And you develop a list of key messages. That could be 3, it could be 12, but they become this modular system that out of your brand statement, we could go back to the JDPP screen and you could see all the central messages there and how those messages roll up into a brand narrative, as I call it. But JDPP could take, and so could the accounting firm, take any one of those sentences and which is its own message, and use it anywhere. And one of the things JDPP has done is taken those messages individually for fundraising campaigns, for different aspects of their website, for the way that they promote different performances, so that they don't all have to be used together, but they can all be used together. They can be mixed and matched depending on what it is that you are saying and who you're saying it to. And what does it also do? It consolidates that story. It consolidates, you're shaping how people see you every single time you go back to your messaging architecture. There's no question. It also, if you're a one-person artist, if you single practice, 1 or 2 person arts organization, 10-person arts organizations, you don't have to guess anymore. What people say to me all the time is, God, every time I write a grant proposal, I got to make it up. Or I've got to sort of take a piece from here and a piece from there. You're certainly going to have to do part of that, but no longer is it a mystery of how to say what you need to say and how you need to put forward what you do and why it's important. It's incredibly efficient. And particularly if you're dealing with volunteers and donors and boards, you can give them the messaging architecture, and then you begin exponentially to spread those brand attributes into the universe and into the hemisphere, so that again we get back to perception being reality, and that reality is in your grasp. And that's where messaging comes in. Architecture is just a fancy word for the messaging, the attributes, and the value proposition, all being rolled up into your brand toolkit. And guess what? The visual system comes last. Right? It's really fun to do a visual system. Everybody does it first, but then you have to redo it if you do all of the brand work. But the visual system is the payoff. And it's I think, fun. It can also be, maddening, but it's fun to then begin to decide what your color palette is and what your fonts are and what your shape is. And then, hey, by the way, what does the website look like? And so all brand is the wellspring that informs everything. It informs what you say, it informs what you do. The website is, of course, the portal into your world. Without a strong brand statement right off the bat, the first time people get there, you don't want them to have to put the pieces together. You want it right there, and then have that draw them into all of the different, sort of tentacles of your organization or your artwork or whatever it happens to be. Visual systems and the brands that they overlay then inform all of your social media. And again, this is all about front loading. Once you do this, then you can begin to really have these kinds of attributes and all of the messages begin to really work for you in some kind of, sort of pistons firing all in the directions that you want them to go in. So I just listed this here. There are obviously more things, but this is my 100,000-foot view of the brand toolkit. And I guess I would leave you with this, which is you got to say it, and say it again. Nobody's going to remember your brand the first time you talk about it or the first time you hand them something with your logo on it. It has to be reinforced all the time. And when I say stick to the script, I don't really mean the script, because there's nothing worse than stuff sounding canned. But once you get familiar with how to talk about this new exciting brand story that you have, it's going to become second nature, and you're not going to want to deviate from it. And as I've said earlier, it has to go everywhere, and with everything that you do. So that's really pretty much it. I know I've raced through this. I hope that it's given you enough to think about. But now let's see, Amanda, what are we going to do? I'm going to go, I guess I'm going to keep screen sharing. Amanda, what am I going to do here?
You could take it off, I think,
Okay.
and then we can have like a conversation. I mean, people are able to unmute themselves. So, I mean, if somebody has a question, you can do the like raise your hand, or yeah, I think that might be easier to kind of manage it, or, you know, if you want to just shout out. Anyone have any questions for Lynn?
Yeah, John, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay, there we go. Fascinating presentation. It was great. I was wondering, in terms of a starting point, have you ever, if there was ever like a preliminary discussion to say, you know, we're approaching a milestone, we ought to reinvigorate our brand or start one. Is this something you would recommend, maybe perhaps designating time at a board meeting, or having a separate meeting outside the board, or both?
I think all of that. And I think that they can work simultaneously, particularly with sort of small to medium organizations. I think that what you need to do is to first decide that you're going to rebrand, or you're going to relook at your brand, or you're going to start anew. And once you have that commitment, then you figure out who are important influencers in that, meaning sort of the internal, not the external. And boards are certainly a part of that. Funders would be another part of it. And figure out who it is that needs to be part of that conversation, and get them in a virtual room, which is the way, you know, most of us are doing it these days. And begin to, I've done this with a number of organizations. First of all, boards really like to be asked. And also boards sort of work that dividing line between being an internal resource, but also being very external, talking to lots of people. They have great data because they are in a position of having to ask people for money or having to ask people for support. And so they're talking to a lot of potential everythings. And so they can bring really good data. And so I think that group, that however, you know, it's staff, it's board members, it's key donors, you don't want it to be too big, but let's say you have, you know, a group of, you know, 10 people who you're charging with, let's think about this anew. And you start with, how do you think we're seen? What's the delta between how people perceive us and how we want people to perceive us? And how can we bring those two closer together? So you define the process that way. And, you know, what are the words that people use? What do fundraisers, what do board members use when they go and solicit funds, right? How do they describe the organization? Is that the way it should be described? Or are board members, as I've often run into, sort of thrown up their hands and say, well, we kind of make it up. You know, and that's perfectly understandable, but I'd rather have them not make it up. And they're actually, anybody who's on the front lines of an organization is very grateful if you tell them, you know, here are the 10 things or 5 things that would be helpful if you were to reinforce. I think it starts and ends with a commitment to doing it. That one word exercise is incredibly helpful. And even if you throw it all out at the end of the day, it gets you focused on something very concrete. Branding gets broad and diffused really easily. So if you can focus on things like one word, using the FedEx example, for instance, and then what is it that we're offering people? What do they get if they make a contribution to this organization? You focus on those 3 things, you're going to have it pretty quickly. And it's not an overnight process. It's something that'll take as long as you give it. But I also am somebody who's a great believer in first impressions. In other words, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Because we can all overthink these things. So if you've got a good flip chart and whiteboard and can really get these first thoughts down, you'll find them later on very valuable. I hope that answers your question.
It does. And actually, I just had one other quick question. And I love the example you gave about the woman said the accounting firm was aspirin. And I was just wondering what I mean, you mentioned, so it was a woman who came up with that idea, and I'm wondering how many women were at an accounting firm. But I also wondered what was her position in the company? Was she mid-level, lower level? Because I don't think it came out of high-level management.
She was the owner. It was a
the owner?
Yeah, it was a relatively small firm. I mean, it's probably, a dozen accountants. I mean, not big. But she was a woman, and there actually are a lot of women-owned CPA firms of sort of the small, mid-sized variety. They aren't the, Arthur Andersons of the world. And that's a particularly competitive space. And that's why they were all sitting there going, give me the magic potion. We need it desperately.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Who else? No question too small here or too off the charts.
I wanted to ask a question. I can't find the button to raise my hand, so I raised my hand the old-fashioned way.
Sure.
First of all, I just wanted to say thank you for your presentation. I think any question that I did have, you answered pretty thoroughly, and it was, for me, it was very powerful to see the examples that you used weren't from the art space and the art sector. And it just proves to me that the information that you were providing is transferable, regardless of how you use it. And it's particularly interesting because I'm working on rebranding, and oftentimes I'm so thankful because none of this has been covered by anyone I've talked to. So I've clearly been speaking to the wrong people.
Well,
but I felt that.
I appreciate your comment. I have comments. I have a couple of thoughts about that, which is that one of the, if you read what people have written about nonprofits, particularly arts organizations over the last couple of years, and their sort of reluctant move into the branding space, it's because the terms are commercial, and somehow that feels like oil and water. And I guess if I got it across today that we all have to just kind of suck it up, that's really the way we have to think about things, even though we're artists and we're creative and we are different than businesses. That's really an assumption you can't afford to make right now. And the other thing about, you haven't heard this before is, and I'm appreciative that you like the commercial examples, because it's always a judgment call on my part whether to go commercial and do that. It's the other reason I wanted you to see JDPP, because I think it's such a shining example of what can be done. But I think that my take on it, and you go to the fact that you haven't heard this before, is that I'm really trying to focus you on that core concept. Get your story down, get the story down, and here are ways to do it. And then you can begin to think about all the other stuff if you have the resources. And so many arts organizations have one person, two people, 5 people, and somehow marketing and branding get tacked on to somebody else's job, and it becomes really hard. But if it does get tacked on to your job, or it's tacked on to somebody else's job in your office, if you can just start to appreciate your story, you don't have to have a lot of fancy add-on marketing until you can afford to have somebody who concentrates just on marketing in your organization. So I'm just trying to be a cheerleader for the value of story.
It's very, very, very appreciated. I'm not an organization. I'm not a nonprofit. I'm actually a profiting artist. So I actually, but again, the information that you provided is one that could be applied to both an artist, an arts organization, a nonprofit organization, a retail business. Like, it's just showing you that, you know, and that's powerful in of itself, is, you know, making that realization. So once again, you know, thank you for, you know, for the knowledge and the information. And I'm sure that I'll be directing some organizations that I work with to, you know, your way, because this is very this is like a very good diagram.
Just to follow up on that, I want to say to everybody that I usually have my best questions after I end a conversation and have, you know, the webinar has closed, and that's usually when I have the, oh, wish I'd asked that question. If that happens, and I bet it will, I am more than happy to have you email me. And even if it's a month from now, if you want to email me and say, hey, you know, I was thinking about that thing and I think I'm a light bulb, but I really need to talk about it. You know, this is, you know, an offer that doesn't expire. So please feel free to, if you'll get the presentation afterward when we've recorded it, and also in PowerPoint, you'll see my email. It's lynn@lynnChamberlain.com, but you'll get it. So please feel free to take advantage of that.
Definitely will. And I did the 1-word exercise. I put energy, you know,
Cool.
and then sun. So I'm already expounding on it. So thank you and blessings.
Thank you.
I think Andrea was the next with the hand up.
Hi, Lynn.
Hey, Andrea, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I have a question. Hopefully it's not too big of a question for the end here, but mine is about how you would approach an organization that's very complex. So I'm thinking, you know, the sort of the examples that you have, those are sort of singular products, singular, you know, one thing, you know, that they do. What happens if you have an organization that does like many things and it's actually really quite diverse? How would you approach winnowing that down? Is it the same? Do you say, well, we'll have a couple different strands. We recognize that we're many things.
It's a great question. And this goes to something that I have worked with for years with colleges and universities. They do a lot, and they have all kinds of different departments and a million things that they do, as you know, Andrea. And many of them need a brand, because, you know, at the end of the day, if you're looking at colleges with your kids, how do you decide? You know, I mean, they've all got great cafeterias, they've all got wonderful sports programs, they've all got great art programs, they've all got this, got that. So how do you decide? And it's particularly critical for higher ed now, as it's kind of in shambles, to figure out what is it that they stand for. And that's my answer to your question, Andrea, that the common point, the point around which diverse groups and organizations and multi-part systems, that's the rallying point. What is it that we, as at the 100,000 foot level, as an organization, as an institution, what is it that we stand for? That begins the branding process that says, using the higher ed example, if you send your kid here, or if you want to enroll here, this is what we stand for. This is what you will align yourself with. And it's been incredibly powerful for large organizations, because it not only works externally, but it suddenly begins to inform the internal constituents, all of whom are like billiard balls on a table, really kind of knocking into each other, but never connecting. But it reaffirms for organizations and particularly colleges and universities, you know, why are we doing this? What is it that our education offers people that is different or better or informed in a different way? What are we offering our students and our donors and our alumni? And I think any organization needs to visit that every so often, but it comes down to what do we stand for? And that's true for an individual artist, by the way, too. What is it you stand for? Because people want to believe in something bigger than themselves. They want to give money not for light bulbs, but to a principle, a goal, a form of education, a form of art. It has to be something that that it or you stand for, that people can immediately see and want to align themselves with. That's my answer. I hope that's helpful, Andrea.
That's very helpful. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Lynn, I was going to add too, with JDPP, we have a lot of different programs, and we had that exact issue. You remember from our conversations.
Mm-hmm.
What do we stand for? What ties it all together?
Mm-hmm. And you nailed it. Last question, anybody?
I think we've got one more hand up. Seal. Or not.
Joni has a question, Amanda, and I have one after Joni.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you. This may actually relate a bit to what Andrea was saying, but you know, I'm a create theater. I'm a theater company, and I definitely I loved what you were saying about knowing your audience.
Mm.
What advice would you have for, you know, I want an audience of theater goers and people who have money to donate, but I also am hoping to generate a new audience of theater goers. And so maybe people who've never been to the theater before. So what sort of advice would you have for that?
I guess the first thing I would ask you is, what's unique about your theater company?
Yeah, so we create nonverbal theater, movement-driven theater.
Wow. So it's multi arts performance. It's sort of a little bit of a lot of things.
Yeah, I would say that it's mainly in the physical realm, highly physical, movement-driven. But yes, we incorporate other aspects as well.
So, what would you say that it stands for? I mean, what's the sort of guiding principle? Why is it the way? Why do you do it the way you do it?
Well, we're called The Other Voice, so we're really interested in exploring the things we're not saying, and we explore those things by not saying anything verbally, but by saying saying a lot physically.
So why would somebody like me be interested in that? What do I get from coming to a performance?
You would get a whole new theater experience where the language is universal, so that everybody is able to participate and everybody is able to have an emotional response, and then you can dig deeper into what that may mean for you and what that may mean for others, and where you would align. You
just answered your question beautifully.
Really?
Yeah, you just answered it beautifully, which is that and the word that struck me is universal, right?
Yeah.
I think one of the things, and this is just me, but I've done a lot of work with organizations in the performing arts. There's a barrier because people think they don't understand theater, or they think they don't understand dance, or they think they don't understand some part of the movement arts, and so there's a hesitancy there.
Yes.
So what you're saying, and we'd have to work out the words on this, but what you're saying is, no, it's universal. This is something anyone can not only participate in, but learn from, be moved by, emote to. And so I would start with that word universal.
Yeah.
Because there's one language that unites us all. I'm sort of riffing on this, but there's one language that unites us all, and that's movement, and that's how we move. It crosses barriers, it crosses language, and really kind of just dig into that and see what you come up with, because I think that you've got a strong value proposition.
Thank you.
Nikita?
Go ahead, Nikita.
This was really good. I really enjoyed this. So my question is actually for Jennifer and you. Jennifer, okay. My question is, was there something that was perceived about your organization while you were evolving and transitioning, and something out the, just like you didn't even realize that people perceived you as, when you were on your journey to actually transitioning into the new branding or into where you are now? Oh, Robin too. Hi, Robin. So I kind of wanted to know, like, what was your aha moment? And how did you actually, I mean, it obviously drove you all to do this, but I'm like on the edge, like, because people see people away and you don't even realize that people perceive you as an artist and as part of the organization, GHAC. So I had to stick that in there. So I just wanted to know what that was actually like when you actually, how did that aspire and transform?
Lynn, do you want me to start, or do you want to start?
All yours.
Oh, okay.
You got to take the credit for this.
Well, I can't really. Okay, first of all, Nikita, it's a long process. I mean, this took us an 8-month rollout. Okay. But I will tell you that a couple of things. One, that yes, you absolutely, you being everyone here on this call, have a brand. You just may not have control of it, right? And there are things that people think about you that you may or may not know about how they think about you, but you darn well should, right? And you have to then discover, and then, as Lynn says, you manage that story. You tell your story. Perception is reality, because if someone thinks that, one thing, that's what you are to them. And we came through, like everybody here, into 2021, through the pandemic, having to completely like reinvent how we do things. And it was very much of a change moment. And I actually did a workshop with Lynn through a sister organization down in Southeast Connecticut. And I was like, hey, Judy, who's our executive and artistic director, we really need to talk to Lynn, because this is what we need to be doing. And so that started. It was a time where we recognized that we were all in a huge change moment. So it was momentum for us, and it actually propelled us forward. And Judy is kind of amazing in that she does not want her legacy to be her name up on a marquee someplace. She wants it to be about what the organization does. So that's how we kind of got into this, and successfully rebranded, I think. I mean, because literally we've had like no pushback from anybody saying, why did you do that? That's terrible. Nobody has said that. It's not like New Coke, right? I'm old enough to remember that. Y'all are too young, but it was a bad thing. Let's just go there. And it was just, you have to feel that moment. I think it goes back to what John was saying, is like, are you recognizing something's out there? That this is time that maybe you're being perceived in a way. We were extremely well known for our work with incarcerated populations, but we're rooted in dance. And we really kind of wanted to get back there. And like, that's to answer Andrea's question, like when you do a lot of different things, that's what connects everything, is it's rooted in movement, dance, and the performing arts and performance. It's what performance is, what is the heart of all of our residencies, be it with kids in schools, making, dream catchers, or is it with folks who are incarcerated or their families. It's about that, putting yourself forward, making yourself vulnerable, doing that performance thing. That's where the growth it happens and experiences. And we feel that, like, oh gosh, I forget your name here, Joni, movement is kind of universal. That's the universal language. So we really wanted to get back to that and take control of that brand. Am I doing this okay, Lynn?
Oh my God, yes. I mean, okay. You couldn't have said it better. I would also, I think this goes to your question, John, in a way, which is that JDPP had to figure out, it was an education. So this is sort of to Nikita's question too. There was an urgency here. I mean, and the urgency was two things. First of all, how do you define movement arts? It's not just about dance. And because dance alone and the ensemble alone did not cover the other legs of this stool. So how in a brand form do you unite those three really important pieces of what JDPP does? The other thing is that there was a transition here. There was a name change, which is one of the hardest things that organizations, particularly ones that are pretty well recognized like JDPP, how do you not lose that equity and that name recognition and that value, the founder's identity, you know? And it was a real risk, and also to do it right after the hard parts of the pandemic. And so it, you know, brand is your friend, because in this case, taking JDPP, having them go through this process during a name change, during, you know, coming out of COVID, I think, and Jen, you can speak to this or disagree, gave them a framework within which to move forward. They had to move forward, but the brand work gave them the vehicle and the algorithm, if you will, for moving on and getting into the future. That's a long-winded answer, but Jen, I don't know if you want to say anything about that. Branding was an important exercise for you to be doing at that moment in time.
Absolutely. All of a sudden, performance became like online, right? And that was what we could do that was visible. Robin can talk about that. I am in awe of her completely about managing online performances and mastering that so beautifully. But everything else, I mean, our programs in the schools, our programs in the prisons, you know, we have done it remotely. We're continuing to do that, but it's not visible. So it was a time that we were like, you know what, this is where we're at, and we needed to really kind of invest and take control of that. And because everything changed, and it was actually a really good time to do it because everything's changed. So changes, you know, take control of it and work with it, go with it.
You know, I agree with Jen completely. It's also a leap of faith. There's no guarantee that this is going to work, and so you really have to sort of trust your best selves and your best instincts, and go with them, because again, that gets to authenticity, that gets to the real brand. But it, you know, it's risky, and I think Jen would agree with me there that, you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But sometimes you don't know that it's broke, and that's important. I also wanted to answer somebody's question, and I don't remember, sorry, who was asking about new audiences. I think you have to figure out who it is that's not on your plate that you want to have join the party, and then go to those communities, go to those sectors and ask them what they need. It's a very powerful question to ask an individual person, or to ask an organization, or to ask a community. What is it that you want from us? I use the example of the New Haven Symphony Orchestra, where, you know, their problem from a branding standpoint is that it's an elitist art, that you can only go if you know, wear a top hat and tails and you know, dripping jewelry, and it's white. And so their challenge was, what do we do? How do we convince people that music is for everyone, that we, you know? And what they did was they took the orchestra into communities of color, into lower income neighborhoods, and played music. And suddenly, you know, violins and cellos and all kinds of, you know, music was being played as a representation of what a symphony orchestra could do. And they did this over the course of a year and a half. And they did it as COVID was beginning to lift. And it has made an enormous difference. And the message was, and I can't tell you the exact brand statement, but the message was, come join us. The symphony is for everyone. We welcome you. In other words, you can come in jeans. You can come, you know, you don't have to fit the mold that you think. And they did this by asking people, by the way. They didn't just dream this up in a conference room. They actually went out into communities and said, what would move you? What could we do that would feel welcoming? And they asked, and they got answers. The other side of asking questions is you have to be prepared for the answers you're going to get. They may not be the ones that you're looking for. And that's incredibly important information. I like to say that you have to, and this is an example of the symphony, you have to meet people where they are in order to bring them to where you are. So it's important to figure out where those audiences, whether you're an individual artist or whether you're a big organization, where can you meet the people that you want to be talking to?